My name is Ava Sterling, and at 34, I watched a judge sign away the life I'd spent a decade holding together. Richard's attorney smiled like he'd scored a championship as Judge Morrison granted him full custody, on the record, because I had no demonstrable means of support. The prenup I'd signed at 24, the one he swore was just a formality, sliced through my future like glass. In one morning, I lost my home, my children, and $4.2 million in marital assets I'd once believed we were building together. I sat there in my best navy dress, spine straight, hands folded, body buzzing. The courtroom smelled like lemon polish and finality. When the gavel fell, I swallowed the words rising in my throat. My attorney's palm found my forearm. Don't speak. Not now. And the moment for protest slipped away. Emma's hair needed braiding every morning. Tyler still woke from nightmares, seeking the rhythm of my heartbeat to fall back asleep. None of that mattered on paper. On paper, I was an unemployable housewife who contributed nothing but spending. Never mind the economics degree. Never mind the dinners I orchestrated so his deals could close, the calendars I synchronized, the fires I put out before anyone smelled smoke. Outside, the winter light was cruel. Richard was already buckling the kids into his BMW. Emma pressed her palm to the glass, tears making little comets down her cheeks. Tyler stared at his shoes, 6 years old and trying to make sense of adult words like custody and decree. I mouthed, "I love you." The car pulled away. In my hand, one mercy, the keys to my battered Honda, the only thing that had stayed in my name, a relic from the life before him. I had one $200 in my checking account, a dress that suddenly felt like armor I couldn't afford, and exactly one place left to go. The old country house my mother left me 3 years ago. We'd called it a weekend project once. Richard always had a reason not to go. 2 hours of switchbacks later, I turned into an overgrown driveway and stared at a peeling Victorian that looked like it could sigh and collapse. The shutters hung crooked. Weeds knifed through the porch boards. It smelled like dust and quiet when I opened the door. It wasn't much. It was mine. And for the first time all day, that felt like a beginning. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and memories. I dropped my single suitcase on the warped floorboards and just stood there, staring at the ghost of a life that used to exist here. My mother's old furniture sat under white sheets, untouched since her passing, like she'd simply stepped out for groceries and never returned. I pulled one of the covers away and a small cloud of dust drifted into the light, her handwriting still framed on the wall. "You can always rebuild." That night, I lay on her faded couch wrapped in a quilt she'd sewn decades ago, listening to the groan of wind through broken shutters. The silence was louder than any courtroom. No children calling for me, no man criticizing the way I breathed. Just the sound of my own heart, reminding me I was still alive. For a long time I let the tears come, silent, steady, unstoppable. Everything I'd depended on was gone. The money, the status, the family portrait that had been more performance than love. When morning came, the sun slid through lace curtains, painting gold over the dust. Something inside me shifted. I realized I had two choices: keep crumbling or crawl out of the ruins. The world had already taken everything. What else was left to fear? I made coffee, instant, bitter, but mine, and stood at the kitchen window. The yard was wild and overgrown, but it was my wilderness. I decided then that this wouldn't be where I came to die. It would be where I learned to fight. I wrote a list on a scrap of paper from Mom's desk. Fix the house. Find a job. Prove I can provide for Emma and Tyler. The handwriting was shaky, but it was a plan. And for the first time in months, I had one. The first few days felt like wrestling ghosts. Every corner of the house reminded me of who I used to be. A wife with plans. A mother with purpose. Now, I was just a woman armed with a bucket, determination, and a handful of dollar store supplies. The plumbing wheezed when I turned it on, spitting brown water before it cleared. The furnace coughed like it hadn't breathed in years. I spent hours sweeping cobwebs from the walls and patching cracks with whatever I could find in the shed. My hands blistered, my back ached, but every repaired hinge, every cleaned window gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. On the third day, a knock startled me. At the window stood an older woman holding a steaming casserole dish. "You must be Ava," she said warmly. "Your mother was a dear friend. I'm Mrs. Henderson. Thought you might be hungry." The smell hit me first. Tuna, cheese, and something that felt like kindness. I invited her in, embarrassed by the mess. "Your mother used to brag about you," she said, watching me devour the meal. "Said you had a mind sharper than any banker in town?" I laughed softly. "That was a long time ago. I haven't used my degree in years," she frowned. "That husband of yours never liked strong women. Your mother told me he'd try to make you small." The words cut deep. After she left, I sat staring at the empty casserole dish, hearing my mother's voice in memory. "You're meant for more than keeping someone else's schedule." That night, I dug through an old box of papers until I found my college diploma, dusty but real proof that I once had potential. The next morning, I put on my cleanest outfit, printed a resume at the library, and drove into town. The job board was disheartening. Minimum wage postings, nothing close to my old life. When I mentioned my background, most interviewers smiled politely before saying, 10 years out of the workforce is a long time. Still, I refused to give up. I circled every listing that required numbers, finance, or even basic accounting. By the time the sun dipped below the mountains, I had one promising lead. Mountain View Community Bank was hiring a part-time clerk. It wasn't much, but it was something. And something, I told myself as I drove home through the dark, was enough to start over. The next morning, I stood in front of the small brick building with the faded sign, Mountain View Community Bank. My palms were damp, my stomach tight with nerves. I hadn't walked into an interview in over a decade, and the thought of explaining that gap felt like dragging my shame into daylight. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. The branch manager, a woman in her late 30s named Patricia Walsh, looked up from her desk when I introduced myself. "You're here about the clerk position?" she asked, her tone polite but cautious. "Yes," I said, forcing a smile. "I know my resume looks unconventional, but I have a background in economics and finance." She raised an eyebrow. 10 years out of the workforce is a long time. We need someone who can start immediately and handle flexible hours. "I can do both," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "I learn quickly, and I don't quit." Something in my tone must have reached her, because she gestured for me to sit. "Tell me about your degree," she said. That single question opened a door I hadn't realized was still in me. I talked about market analysis, budgeting, and how I used to manage financial planning portfolios before marriage. For 20 minutes, Patricia listened, occasionally nodding. When I finished, she leaned back, thoughtful. "You know more than most of the people who apply here," she said. "I'll give you a trial period, 3 days a week, $15 an hour. If it works out, we'll talk about expanding your role." I thanked her, trying not to cry. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. As I stepped outside, the mountain air felt different, lighter, alive. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "I'm coming back." And for the first time since losing everything, I actually believed it. My first day at the bank felt like walking into someone else's life, a version of me I'd long buried. I wore my one decent outfit, hair neatly pinned, pretending confidence I didn't yet feel. Patricia introduced me to the team and sat me at the front desk, handling deposits and loan inquiries. At first, my hands trembled over every form. But by midday, something shifted. A young couple came in, anxious about applying for their first home loan. As I walked them through debt-to-income ratios and interest options, the numbers started flowing naturally, like they'd never left me. I caught the husband smiling when I explained something clearly. "You really know your stuff," he said. The words hit harder than he could imagine. For the first time in years, someone saw my value, not for what I could give, but for what I knew. That afternoon, Patricia stopped by my desk. "You've got a good way with people," she said. "Ever thought about getting certified as a financial advisor?" I laughed softly. "Not in a long time." "Well," she said, smiling, "maybe it's time again." Driving home that evening, the world looked a little brighter. The roads I'd dreaded now felt like paths leading somewhere, but when I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange. A patch of siding on the porch that didn't match the rest of the house. The boards looked newer, the nails too shiny. Curiosity tugged at me. I grabbed a flashlight and crouched beside the wall. Up close, I realized the section seemed to cover what used to be a small window. My heart began to race. I fetched an old crowbar from the shed and carefully pried the first plank loose. Dust fell, and behind the wood was a small door. Hands trembling, I unlatched it and reached inside. My fingers brushed something cold, metal. Pulling it out, I found a small, rusted safe, about the size of a shoebox. It had a combination lock. I tried my mother's birthday, nothing. And then my own, still nothing. I sat back on the floorboards, staring at it under the flickering porch light. Why would Mom have hidden something like this? What could she have kept secret all these years? As the night deepened, the wind whispered through the trees like an omen. Whatever was inside that safe, I knew it was about to change everything. I carried the safe inside, setting it gently on my mother's old kitchen table. The metal was cold, the paint flaking in tiny gray curls. It looked ordinary, but something about it pulsed with weight, as if the air itself held its breath. I tried a few more combinations, each one echoing in the quiet house. Then, a memory surfaced. Mom always joked that our family's lucky day was August 23rd, her wedding anniversary. My hands trembled as I turned the dial. 8, 0, 8, 2, 3, click. The sound was soft, but it cracked something open in me. I lifted the lid and found a neat stack of envelopes tied with faded ribbon, a few jewelry boxes, and several official-looking documents. On top lay an envelope with my name written in my mother's looping handwriting. My breath caught. I unfolded the letter, the familiar scent of her perfume clinging faintly to the paper. My dearest Ava, if you're reading this, then life has tested you in ways I feared it might. Your father and I always knew you'd face a world that sometimes rewards control over kindness. That's why we prepared for this moment. I blinked, confused. The next lines made my pulse quicken. Before you were born, your father and I built something. Quietly, deliberately. We invested every spare dollar from his teaching salary, studied markets, and grew a portfolio no one ever suspected existed. We wanted to live simply, to teach you value before wealth. I stared at the documents beneath the letter. Stock certificates, property deeds, and bank account statements from institutions I'd never heard of. Even the smallest balances were significant. Together they added up to millions. When I saw how Richard treated you, the control, the manipulation, I realized you might one day need freedom he could never touch. So I moved everything into secure trusts, hidden behind names only I could trace. If you are reading this, they now belong to you. Use them wisely, my love. They are your shield, not your sword. My heart hammered against my ribs. My quiet, bookish mother, the small-town librarian who'd lived frugally her whole life, had been a silent financial genius. She hadn't left me a crumbling inheritance. She'd left me a plan. I spread the documents across the table. Beneath the letter was a life insurance policy with my name as the beneficiary, $3.8 million. Beneath that, a key labeled Safety Deposit Box, number 247, County National Bank. Tears blurred my vision. All this time I'd thought she left me a broken house and fading memories. But she'd left me a fortress, built quietly, hidden perfectly, waiting until I was ready to claim it. I leaned back, laughing through the tears. Richard had spent years convincing me I was helpless. My mother had spent decades making sure I'd never truly be. In that moment, surrounded by the evidence of her brilliance and love, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not anger. Not grief. Power. For the first time in years, I slept without fear. When morning came, sunlight spilled across the stacks of documents covering the table. A strange mix of grief and gratitude tightening my chest. My mother had been preparing for this long before I even knew what I needed saving from. She'd seen through Richard's charm before I'd even fallen for it. I made coffee and began reading everything carefully. Her handwriting appeared again in the margins of certain documents. Small notes, calculations, and reminders. She'd built a network of investments. Blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, rental properties scattered across 3 counties. There were folders detailing exactly how to access them, how to manage them, even the names of 2 financial advisors she'd trusted decades ago. I realized something incredible. My mother hadn't just left me money. She'd left me a map. The woman I'd been, the one who begged a judge for mercy, was gone. The one sitting here was shaking, yes, but not from fear. From awakening. By noon I had created a plan. Step 1, secure the assets. Step 2, liquidate just enough to survive and renovate the house. Step 3, rebuild my professional credentials and prove to the court that I could provide a stable home for Emma and Tyler. It wasn't revenge I wanted anymore. It was justice, the quiet kind that came from competence. I called the bank listed in the documents and scheduled an appointment to access the safety deposit box. The manager verified my mother's records and handed me a small brass key that matched the one I'd found. Inside the box were more investment certificates, property titles, and, unbelievably, detailed spreadsheets of her financial strategy handwritten on yellow paper. At the bottom, I found another letter. Ava, money alone doesn't protect you. Understanding it does. You have everything you need to rebuild. Your education, your instincts, and now, your independence. Use this not to fight, but to rise. Her faith in me hit like a tidal wave. I thought of the years I'd spent silencing that capable version of myself. The woman who once aced financial theory exams, who understood numbers like second nature. I'd traded her brilliance for someone else's approval. Not anymore. I drove home from the bank with my heart pounding and my head full of ideas. That night, I cleared the dining table and created my war room. Financial records on one side, renovation estimates on the other. I began calculating budgets, projected returns, and repair priorities. I could already see the path forming. Turn one of the rental properties into a steady income stream, refinance the others, and use part of the liquid assets to fund a legitimate business. The more I planned, the clearer my mind became. By midnight, I had pages of calculations, lists of contacts to call, and an outline for an entirely new career. But one realization changed everything. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to thrive. I wanted Richard to see that the woman he'd dismissed as nothing without him had become everything he feared. Self-sufficient, powerful, unstoppable. I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, hair messy, eyes alight with purpose. I almost didn't recognize her. This version of me with confidence returning to her bones. I whispered softly into the empty room. You were right, Mom. The silence seemed to hum back in agreement. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't cry for what I'd lost. I smiled for what I was about to build. The following weeks unfolded like a slow sunrise, uncertain at first, then brilliant. With my mother's guidance echoing from every letter and ledger, I began transforming her hidden fortune into something living. I started by calling the financial firm she'd used for years. The advisor, a calm man named Thomas Parker, seemed genuinely impressed after reviewing her records. Your mother was remarkable, he said. Her portfolio's been outperforming the market for 15 years. You clearly inherited her intuition. For once, I didn't deflect the compliment. I took notes, asked questions, and absorbed every bit of knowledge I could. Within days, I'd liquidated enough assets to pay off the small mortgage remaining on the farmhouse, repair the plumbing and electrical systems, and refurnish the interior. The house that once echoed with loneliness began to hum with energy. My mother's presence felt stronger than ever. At night, I studied. I signed up for an online financial advisor certification program that could be completed in 6 months. It was grueling, but I thrived on the challenge. Numbers made sense in a world where emotions often didn't. Each solved equation. Each past test rebuilt the confidence I'd lost under Richard's control. By day, I still worked at the bank, and Patricia quickly noticed the change in me. You're glowing, Ava, she said one afternoon after watching me help a nervous client understand loan terms. You've found your rhythm. I think I finally remembered who I am, I replied. She laughed softly. Keep going. I see a future branch manager in you. Those words carried me through long nights of coursework and endless spreadsheets. My world, once confined to pain and survival, was expanding. Then came a moment that tested everything. During a supervised visit, Emma asked, "Mom, Daddy says you can't take care of us because you don't have a job." The comment stung, but I stayed calm. "Sweetheart, I do have a job," I said gently, "and I'm studying to help people with their money. The same thing I went to college for." Her eyes lit up. "Like Grandma used to do?" That question, simple, innocent, nearly broke me. "Exactly like Grandma," I whispered. After that visit, I sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed across the hills. For the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt grounded. The same strength my mother must have felt when she made her impossible choices. Each day, I built a little more, repairing, learning, saving, hoping. The woman who'd once been erased in court was returning, piece by piece. And though Richard still thought I was broken and beaten, he had no idea I was quietly preparing to rise, stronger, smarter, and entirely my own. 6 months later, the woman staring back at me in the mirror barely resembled the one who had once walked out of that courthouse with nothing but a suitcase. My certification exam results had just come in. I'd passed with distinction. Patricia hugged me when I told her, tears in her eyes. "I knew it," she said. "You're meant for more than this desk, Ava." She was right. Within weeks, word spread through town about the bank clerk who could explain investments better than anyone else. Clients started asking for me by name. Even the older farmers came in seeking my help to manage their savings. Every success added a small piece back to the confidence Richard had tried to crush. But it wasn't just about money anymore. I was learning how to rebuild myself from the inside out. The guilt, the shame, they didn't disappear overnight, but they stopped owning me. Each time I looked at the farmhouse, now freshly painted and full of light, I saw proof that broken things could be restored. With Patricia's blessing, I began meeting clients independently, helping them budget, invest, and plan. What started as side consultations soon turned into something bigger. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by files and charts. The realization hit me like a quiet thunderclap. I could do this on my own. By summer's end, I had registered my own small business, Sterling Financial Planning, named after my family, not my marriage. I rented a modest office downtown, just one room, a desk, and a secondhand sign in the window. On my first official day, I stood there alone, heart pounding, and whispered, "You did it. Mom." The phone rang not long after, a referral from the bank. My first official client. I worked late into the night, filing paperwork and sketching goals for the months ahead. When I finally turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the dark window. There she was, Ava Sterling, independent, capable, and unafraid. Richard once said I'd never make it without him. Now every breath of progress proved how wrong he'd been, and this was only the beginning. A year after the divorce, I walked into the same courthouse that had stripped me of everything. But this time, I wasn't trembling. Gone was the frightened, dependent woman clinging to a future built around someone else's name. In her place stood Ava Sterling, licensed financial advisor, homeowner, and business owner. My navy suit fit differently now, like armor that I had earned. Outside the courtroom, my attorney, Sarah, reviewed our files one last time. "You're ready," she said, her tone firm but kind. "Stay composed, no matter what his team tries. Your life speaks louder than any argument." When we entered, Richard was already seated across the aisle with his expensive legal entourage. He still looked polished, but something had changed in his expression. A flicker of unease. Maybe it was the first time he realized I wasn't coming here to beg. Judge Morrison, the same man who had granted Richard full custody a year earlier, scanned our documents. "Mrs. Sterling," he began, "you're requesting a modification of custody based on changed circumstances. Please proceed." Sarah stood calm and steady. "Your Honor, my client has demonstrated extraordinary personal and financial growth over the past 12 months. She has rebuilt her life with stability, professionalism, and care, providing an ideal environment for her children." Then came the evidence. Employment history, documented pay increases and promotion letters from the bank, certification, proof of Ava's credentials as a financial planner, business registration, Sterling Financial Planning, active and profitable. Home inspection photos, bright rooms, renovated bedrooms for each child. Bank statements showing consistent income and responsible management. Each piece of paper told a story. The woman who'd been written off as unemployable had turned herself into a success. Story! Richard's jaw tightened as Sarah handed over a summary of my annual income. Comfortable, respectable, and entirely my own. His lead attorney, a man named Marcus Webb, tried to sound composed. Your Honor, he said, while we acknowledge Mrs. Sterling's recent progress, we question the sustainability of this so-called success. Sudden wealth and new ventures don't necessarily make a parent stable. I rose, my voice clear. Your Honor, this isn't sudden wealth. This is the result of education, work, and the assets my late mother left me, legally, transparently, and properly documented. Sarah presented the inheritance records, complete with tax filings and transfer confirmations. The courtroom murmured when the total valuation was read aloud. Even Judge Morrison looked impressed. Then came the moment that changed everything. The court-appointed visitation supervisor, Ruth, was called to testify. Her notes covered every weekly visit I'd had with my children over the past year. She smiled kindly before speaking. I've observed Mrs. Sterling with her children dozens of times, Ruth said. She provides consistent emotional support, patience, and affection. The children are relaxed and happy in her presence. They often talk about wanting to live with her full-time. Richard's attorney tried to object, but Ruth's professionalism was undeniable. She described how Emma's anxiety had lessened and how Tyler, once withdrawn, had become talkative again during visits. Both children express a strong, secure bond with their mother, she concluded. Sarah turned to the judge. Your Honor, Mrs. Sterling has not only achieved financial independence, but emotional stability, something critical to a child's well-being. When it was Richard's turn, his composure cracked. Money doesn't make you a mother, he snapped. Those kids need consistency. Ava plays at independence, but she's just pretending. She can't handle real responsibility. The words stung, but I didn't let them show. Instead, I looked directly at him and said, I've handled everything you said I couldn't, alone. And I've done it without tearing anyone down. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. Judge Morrison reviewed the evidence quietly, flipping through each page with deliberate care. Finally, he looked up. The court finds substantial changes in Mrs. Sterling's circumstances, both financially and personally. The stability and growth she has demonstrated warrant a modification of the custody arrangement. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. The court will implement a transitional plan, he continued. The children will spend weekends with their mother for 1 month. If that adjustment proceeds smoothly, Mrs. Sterling will assume primary custody, with Mr. Sterling granted alternating weekends. The gavel came down. The sound echoed like thunder. I exhaled, tears burning behind my eyes. I'd done it. After a year of silence, sacrifice, and rebuilding, I'd earned back what mattered most: my children. Outside the courthouse, Richard followed me to the parking lot. You think this is over? He hissed. You can't just erase me. I turned to face him, calm and unshaken. I'm not erasing you, Richard. I'm just not living under you anymore. His face hardened, but there was fear behind the anger. For the first time, he saw me for what I was, his equal, maybe even his better. As I drove home, I imagined Emma and Tyler running through the yard of the farmhouse, their laughter filling the halls that had once been silent. This house, my mother's fortress, would finally become what it was meant to be, a home for new beginnings. That night, I stood on the porch under a silver moon, holding my mother's letter again. Her words echoed softly in my mind. Use this not to fight, but to rise. I finally understood. The real victory wasn't in beating Richard. It was in becoming the woman my mother always knew I could be. And as the wind rustled through the trees, I whispered to her memory, Mom, I did it. And I'm not done yet. For a few months, everything felt almost perfect. The children adjusted beautifully to the new schedule. Emma filled her room with drawings, Tyler begged to help me paint the garden fence, and laughter returned to the farmhouse. For the first time in years, Peace didn't feel like a borrowed dream. But I should have known Richard wouldn't stay quiet for long. Men like him didn't accept defeat. They obsessed over it. It started subtly. Patricia at the bank called one morning, sounding uneasy. "Ava, I received a strange inquiry today," she said. "A man claiming to be an auditor asked for your salary, tax ID, even client information." I hung up immediately, but something didn't feel right. 2 days later, one of my clients forwarded an email supposedly from the State Financial Board, asking whether Sterling Financial Planning had ever mishandled funds. The logo was official, but the contact number didn't match any real department. I knew that kind of tactic. It was Richard's way of playing chess in the dark. I reported the harassment to my attorney, Sarah, who was livid. "If we can prove he's behind this," she said, "we'll petition for sanctions and possibly restrict his visitation. But he's too careful. He'll use intermediaries." That night, I sat in my office surrounded by ledgers and silence, thinking about everything I'd rebuilt. My business had grown to nearly 100 clients. The last thing I wanted was to fight dirty. But I also wasn't about to let Richard destroy what I'd created. Then I remembered something my mother wrote in her final letter. "Knowledge is power only when you know how to protect it." I started making calls. Quiet ones. Within days, I'd formed an alliance of local business owners, bankers, and legal professionals who had worked with me and trusted my reputation. They agreed to document every suspicious inquiry and forward it to Sarah's office. Together, we built a firewall, not digital, but human, against Richard's sabotage. The following week, Richard crossed a line. An elderly client, Mrs. Patterson, called me in tears. "Sweetheart," she said, "a man came to my house claiming to be from the tax department. He asked me for all my paperwork with you." That was it. He'd impersonated a government official, an offense serious enough to destroy him legally. I called Sarah immediately. "This is criminal impersonation," she said, her voice sharp. "We'll file complaints with the police and the state attorney general." While she handled the legal side, I began crafting a more personal response. I'd spent a decade managing Richard's books, organizing his so-called charitable donations. I knew exactly where his skeletons were buried, and now I had the means to expose them. A few nights later, I asked him to meet at a local cafe, neutral ground. He arrived with that smug half-smile, certain I was there to plead. "I think we need to talk," I said evenly. "You've been busy lately, calling my clients, sending fake investigators. You've crossed into illegal territory," he laughed. "You can't prove anything." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopies of his donations, payments funneled to a fake nonprofit that conveniently financed the campaigns of zoning officials who awarded him lucrative contracts. His face blanched. "These are public records, Richard," I said softly, "and the press loves a good story about corruption in small-town construction deals." He leaned forward, jaw tight. "What do you want?" "Simple," I replied. "You stop. No calls, no fake audits, no intimidation. You accept the custody ruling and leave my business alone. Do that, and this folder disappears forever." The silence that followed was heavy and satisfying. His power, once absolute, evaporated right there in that cafe. "You've changed," he muttered finally, eyes hard. "Yes," I said, standing, "and I'm never changing back." As I left him sitting there, I felt no fear, no anger, just clarity. I hadn't ruined him out of vengeance. I'd simply shown him what real strength looked like. Richard never tried to contact my clients again. And for the first time I realized I didn't need revenge. Justice had already found its way back to me, in the quiet, relentless form of my own resilience. The months that followed were the calmest of my entire adult life. The chaos Richard left behind faded like fog, replaced by laughter, sunlight, and the soft rhythm of real life. Emma and Tyler adjusted beautifully. Emma decorated her room with string lights and pastel paintings, while Tyler turned the old barn into his science lab, collecting bugs and rocks like treasures. For the first time, our house didn't echo. It breathed. Each morning began the same way. I'd make pancakes while the kids argued over who got the biggest one. Then after school drop-off, I'd head to my office downtown. What had once been a one-room consultancy was now a full-fledged firm. Sterling Financial Planning had grown into a trusted name. My clients came from neighboring towns, drawn by word of mouth and one simple promise: honesty. Patricia still visited often. One afternoon, she walked through the door carrying a coffee and grinned at the sight of my bustling office. "Remember when you were terrified to ask for this job?" she teased. I laughed. Now I can't imagine life without it. By summer, I had hired 2 assistants and leased the empty office next door to expand. What had begun as survival had turned into purpose. And the best part? I did it all on my terms, without shortcuts, without deceit, and without Richard's shadow looming over me. At home, the transformation was even more profound. Emma started bringing her friends over after school, proud to show off the cool office where her mom worked. Tyler, ever curious, asked if he could learn money math so he could help with clients someday. Hearing him say that melted something deep inside me. My children no longer saw me as broken. They saw me as strong. One evening, after they'd gone to bed, I sat on the porch with a glass of tea and looked out at the horizon. The fields shimmered under the moonlight, peaceful and endless. I thought about my mother, about the wisdom she'd left behind. She hadn't just saved me with money. She'd saved me with foresight. The business continued to thrive. By fall, I'd opened 2 satellite offices in nearby towns, employing women who, like me, had once been told they weren't enough. We called ourselves the Phoenix Team, a nod to the ashes we'd all risen from. For the first time, I felt balance, not between work and home, but between who I was and who I was becoming. As the leaves turned gold and the farmhouse filled with the scent of cinnamon and laughter, I realized something simple but powerful. Peace isn't the absence of struggle. It's the presence of freedom, and at long last, I was living both. 2 years later, I stood by the window of my new office, a sunlit space overlooking the valley that once defined my lowest point. Now it framed everything I'd built: 3 thriving branches, 12 employees, and a list of clients who trusted me not just with their money, but with their dreams. But the real victory wasn't written in balance sheets or contracts. It was written in the sound of my children's laughter echoing through the hallways of our home. The home my mother had left me to rebuild my life. Emma, now 10, had just won her school's essay contest. The topic? The person who inspires me most. Her first line made me cry. My mom taught me that being strong doesn't mean never falling. It means standing up every time you do. Tyler, now 8, was thriving in school and loved helping at the office after classes. He called himself my junior advisor, proudly handing out pencils and calculators to clients. Watching them grow confident, unafraid of the world, felt like the truest form of healing. Richard had faded into the background of our lives. He still saw the kids on weekends, but the power dynamic had shifted completely. He was polite now, cautious even. His arrogance replaced by something almost like respect. His business, once untouchable, had weakened after his questionable deals were quietly exposed. Karma had simply done its job. One evening, I was invited to speak at a women's empowerment conference in the city. Standing before hundreds of faces, I told my story, not to relive the pain, but to show what comes after it. I spoke about how I'd lost $4.2 million, my home, and my dignity, only to discover that the real wealth had been inside me all along. When I finished, the room stood in silence before erupting into applause. I saw women wiping their eyes, nodding, smiling through tears. And in that moment, I understood that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told she wasn't enough. Later that night, I sat on the farmhouse porch again, the same spot where I'd once cried over everything I'd lost. The stars stretched wide above me, the same ones my mother must have looked at years before when she decided to protect my future. I whispered softly into the cool air. "You were right, Mom. You saved me before I even knew I needed saving." Inside, on my office desk, her framed quote still stood. The one she'd written in her looping script. "You can always rebuild." I finally understood what she meant. Rebuilding isn't about restoring what was broken. It's about creating something stronger, wiser, and more beautiful from the ruins. As the porch light flickered, I realized the journey had come full circle. I wasn't just my mother's daughter anymore. I was her legacy, a living testament to resilience, courage, and faith in one's own strength. I looked toward the hills and smiled, feeling peace settle deep within my chest. My story wasn't one of revenge, but of rebirth. Message to the listener: life will break you in ways you never expect, through betrayal, loss, or silence that feels endless. But remember this: your worth is not defined by what someone takes from you, but by what you choose to rebuild afterward. Strength isn't born from perfection. It's born from survival, from daring to start again when the world thinks you can't. Like Ava Sterling, you have the power to turn pain into purpose. The greatest revenge is not destruction, it's transformation. And sometimes the most beautiful victory is simply becoming the person you were always meant to be.